In this video, we're going to learn all about the shaded base coat technique. I know that's a funny sounding name, but it's the best one that I could come up with for this technique. We've got an example of a miniature here. This is from Raging Heroes. And this orc war boss was painted with the shaded base coat technique. And the idea is that you put on a limited amount of colors that are lighter than what they're going to be in the end. So you basically work a little bit lighter and you do all of your darker shading and some of the tinting, where we change some of the hues of the greens and maybe tone down some of the red in the shadow areas. That's all done with glazing. Glazing is really a controlled wash, but to set those glazes up, that's the part that we're really going to focus on here in this video. One of the purposes of the shaded base coat is to allow you to maybe work a little bit faster, a little bit freer. Now some of the colors that I've put out on the palette, we have some in the gray here. This is an intermediate blue from Vallejo, a verdigris. I have a series of browns here, olive drab, German field gray, and this is green sky. We have a leather brown here. We have a P3, and I think this is a rucksack tan. This is one of the high pigment paints from Reaper. It's called Maiden Flash. We've got this flat red, and that's something that we're going to use for the red on our orc. I'm also going to be using a few other items here. This is from Reaper. It's called Flow Improver. This actually helps a lot with the shaded base coat because it's not about dry brushing. This actually helps you keep your brush nice and wet without having to throw a lot of water on it. So you kind of avoid some of the watermarks. The glaze medium, that's more to keep your paint wet, not only on the palette, but also on the miniature itself in case you want to do some wet in and wet blending. There's a few other colors that'll probably make an appearance out on the palette once we get into this. And later on in the video, when it gets to the stage where we're going to do some glazing, I'll talk about those glazes. But the next thing that we want to discuss are the brushes and this palette. I have the brushes laid out on the palette in 3 primary groups. First, we've got filbert brushes. These are really the most important for the shaded base coat technique because of the different type of strokes that we're going to use. These come in sizes 2 through 8, but I mostly use 4s and 6s. There's an American Painter. This is probably the most cheap version of the filbert brush. You can see that this brush has a large flat surface on it, and we can cover a lot of area very quickly. You have these tapered rounded edges on the face of the brush. This is going to let us do some of this blending, wet blending, and also allow us to glide the brush over some of these surfaces of the figure. Also the chisel edge is going to really be helpful. And when we're not dry brushing, but actually just applying the paint gently using this feathered stroke, this is really the perfect brush for that. This next set of brushes, they're actually craft brushes. These are number 8 rounds. They come in a package of 10, like this. You can see at this price, we're looking at about 50 cents a brush. And while they have a nice tip when they're new, they also, when they've been used and worn down a little bit, you can use these for shaded base coat. You can especially use these for painting your bases, any kind of rough surface where you don't really care what happens to your brush. last set of brushes that I'll talk about are liner brushes. This again is another American Painter brush. I like to use the liner brushes versus spotters because these hold more pigment. Obviously because the bristles are about twice as long. They're just as small, the point is the same, but longer bristles means you'll be able to do more with them. Now the more worn out American Painters, those are the kind of things I use to glaze shaded base coat. You have here, this is a mid-grade liner brush. Falls about halfway in the price scale between the American Painter and this, which is a Winsor Newton Series 7. And look at the handle here and see that this brush has gotten a lot of use. All kinds of paint all over here, but the bristles still in nice shape because I used all of these other brushes to do the dirty work, the filberts, especially the craft brushes. Last thing I want to cover is this disposable palette. And here's the pad right here. But these are available at art stores. We got these online. And the best part of these disposable palettes is that when you're done for the day or for that session, you just take the sheet, you tear it off, you throw it away, and you're done. That's as easy as cleanup gets. So now we'll move on to covering in depth the shaded base coat. Okay, the first aspect to our shaded base coat is to think about working all around the miniature, as I've been talking about, instead of just focusing, say, on this part of the arm, or just the face, or just the weapon. Now, one way to avoid doing that is to start with these bigger brushes, the number 8 round, the filbert. I'm going to use the number 8 round just to throw some paint on the miniature. And it's about at least getting a color out there as soon as possible. Let's see, I've done, kind of taken two things. I've taken the olive drab and mixed it with the green. Olive drab mixed it with the gray. Where I see on the miniature parts that basically metal. All I want to do, and you're going to see these don't show up very much against our neutral gray background, but they are going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit more green compared to just the neutral gray. And all I'm trying to do is just get some color on this. You could do this with the filbert brush too. It's just it's gonna beat up your brush a little bit and wear it down a little bit faster. And I thought, well, that's what these brushes are for. So now I've got the brown and the green. Yeah, I'm just gonna right here, and you see I'm not really caring that it overlaps onto a part that's actually gonna end up being red. All I want to do is just kind of create a little notation for myself. Okay, I know I'm going to want to work in the greens here. So it's all about just throwing down some color. I'm going to grab some of the gray here again. And don't be shy about letting things mix together. Because here, this is probably going to be something that's brown. Okay, let's throw some brown out here. The whole point of this is just throw a few basic colors on the miniature. Don't really care where they go at this point. Now this is a little, maybe a little different situation in that, you know, it's an orc instead of, say, a paladin that's going to have perfectly shiny armor. The reason I chose this is because it has lots of nice big shapes. It's got a little bit of several different colors, some browns, it's got some flesh tone, some armor on it, a little bit of leather. I just thought this had some nice, kind of a little bit of everything. I can just kind of show different parts of this whole notion of shaded base coat. Say if this was a lizard, some kind of little lizard, and it was going to be turquoise, well, guess what, most of your color would be turquoise that we're putting down. This is just something very generic. I think it's going to be green. I sort of throw in some green, but look at I haven't reached into any of these light colors yet. Those are still untouched for the time being. But these are certainly nowhere near our darkest darks. And just as an example, let's put some black out here. So this, that's dark. Let's put that comparison. So we have not put down a dark, we have not put down a light. What are we doing? We're working in the middle tones. And you're going to hear that expression a lot because it's very important. That's the whole reason why I prime this kind of middle neutral gray. It's not super light, it's not super dark. And I worked pretty fast just to make sure the whole surface was covered. Well, this might just look like a mass of gray. There are some differences. We have green, kind of a green tint here. This is more gray. We have some hint of brown here. The pants are going to be, and on the ends of the boots. And at this stage, what I'm going to do is dry this off. And I'm going to try to show you some more targeted. I'm going to start off with the flesh here. I'm going to probably use this green, some of the green sky, and probably a little bit of the rucksack tan and the pale flesh. So we're probably going to use these, roughly about these 4 colors, and work up these flesh tones a little bit, but not too much. Now that he's mostly dried, we're going to work with a couple of our brushes here, mostly the filbert. And the idea is to take some of these flesh colors, like we talked about, and just do some of this lighter shading. It's not final shading, it's just to start to build up some lighter colors. And you're going to build up a few colors here on the palette. I want to make sure I have a little bit of that at least. And you can see there's still a fair amount of pigment on the brush. This is where I can brace my hand. And this is where I'm going to do that stroke where I told you about it. I just kind of drag the brush along the surface. It's not dry brushing, because dry brushing there would be almost nothing on here. You can see my thumb here. There's plenty of paint on that brush. And what I'm doing, this is all about kind of making these notations. Well, okay, this is where the lighter color is going to be. Same thing on this hand. And I still preserve some of the original color. And see, I'm just kind of gently pulling the brush kind of sideways along the surface. We've got this back of the arm here. See how this dowel rod lets me kind of spin it around as I work on it. I can even use the dowel, I can hold the brush in place and just spin the dowel rod. It's just a little piece of wood, maybe a 1/2 inch wide. And I just drilled a hole in it. It would accept a paperclip pin. So you can see we still haven't, we're nowhere near the lightest color yet. Looks that way, but it's really not. We're still mostly in the middle tones. So I'm kind of pulling away a little bit of the face, and you can see that the face is starting to emerge. Same thing on the arms. Now let's get a little more of that warmer color so that the green doesn't get too pale. And you can see we almost have a record here of what we started with and what we've worked up to. So I'll go back to the face, along the jaw here. Nice thing about working this way is that you can even do some went into it blending right on the surface. And if he starts to look like a very pale orc, that's okay, because remember, it's all about adding the darks later. This is all about establishing where are the lights gonna go. Same thing all around here. On the arm. The hand. Face, the inside of the hand here. Inside of the arm. So now I am going to grab just a little bit of this. We'll start to add this to our mix. And brace my fingers against each other, against the dowel rods. And this is where I start to pick out some of the lightest lights. So we're not wiping out those middle tone colors. We're trying to leave those be, but also establish some of these lights. We got the knuckles here. I'll take the brush and we're just gonna, like this, right over the top of the knuckles there. Here on the top of these knuckles, on the tops of the muscles here. Same thing here on these knuckles. And what I try to do is hold the miniature and the brush in just such a way. Sometimes it's about the angle of the miniature and the angle of the brush. Because if I was working this way, see, I start to fill in these gaps. I want to keep those. So by kind of changing the angle this way, and you can see it would be really hard to do this at the miniature. And here's the base. this miniature is going to go on. Well, it'd be really hard to reach some of this stuff if he was sitting on this already. And that's the whole reason for the dowel rod. Maybe we're going to just throw a little bit of this here on. There's a rock that he's standing on, just to make sure some of that flesh tone is carried through. Now this is about as light as I'm going to get right here. Back to the face, and you can see that I do even fewer and fewer areas the lighter the color gets. Now, the nice thing is I didn't really have to worry about any kind of color formulas. I grabbed the color that I thought would lighten it without making it too chalky, which means don't use white. So I'm picking light colors that still have some sort of a tint to them. In this case, more of a pinkish flesh tone or a little more yellow. So that's going to be it for the flesh tone. We're going to stop there. Now another big area, it's in several places. Here is the metal. So we've got some of the gray here. Now there's a few colors that I want to use to lighten it. I'm going to use them both because it's going to give each one a very different look. So here is the intermediate blue mixed with pink, the pale flesh, and that's going to go on the underside here. Let's make sure you can sort of see that. And watch what I'm going to do. I change the angle of this. See the brush strokes go upwards from the bottom up. Now this is not supposed to be an exercise in non-metallic metal. You could do this with metallics too. Now if this was, I don't know, some kind of chainmail or whatever, some kind of not too bright silver, you could do the same thing. But what I'm going to do is, all of the metals that are kind of facing towards the ground, I just want to make sure those are a bit more warm, because, well, guess what? I use that same pink color on the base here, so I want to reflect that. Even if you were using metallic paints, you would want to somehow emphasize that reflected warmer. You could even add a little bit of the tan to make sure that it's warm enough. As you can see, I did not destroy all of the middle tone. There's still light left there. Now on these little spikes, I'm not going to get too crazy with these. I'm just going to throw a little bit of paint there because the red, once that goes over that, could wipe some of that away. Let's go to this weapon here. Now this is going to have more of the blue in it. This side is just the opposite. I want this to get some more of the pink color in it. What I'm going to do is the brush is going to go this way and this way. Now this, you're going to see more of the texture of this blade. It's actually not a smooth piece of metal. It's kind of this rough cut metal of some kind. It's got dings and dents in it. You can see even the mechanisms here. Now I drag that across, it starts to reveal some of the mechanisms. And you can see what happens is I get a little lighter. Mechanisms come out a little more. This starts to come out a little more. Let's do a little more on underside of the gun here. I'm going to try and change the angle of the miniature. You can see the brush is going to just scroll along the surface. So look what happens when I color that's got that's a little more of the intermediate gray. So look at, now you can sort of see how we've kept this darker color on this side. We put the light on top. Now as I work towards this side, what I'm going to do is brace my hand again. And this time I'm going to work downwards like so. This to be a little bit darker. That needs to be light. And here on the muzzle, and I'm just going to throw some lighter gray here. I've got these armor pieces on the back. You can see I'm working at an angle. The whole idea is to at least pick up a little bit of the texture. It'll pick up more as you work the lighter colors in, and also as you do your darker shading. And you got some metal along the backs of the boots here. We have another metal plate here. So the metal plates here and here are red. This part is metal though, and we don't have to worry about affecting that top plate because we still have to put the red there yet. That's why I like to not do finished areas ever. I like to work in all the areas first, because now I don't have to worry about, oh, what if I hit the face with this gray? It's no big loss because we haven't done a whole lot of detail. We haven't even put our shading on it yet. I'm just going to throw a little bit on the helmet here. And on the top, we'll see a little more. See how that's a little bit lighter. And like I said before, this will also work with metallics. Maybe you just go with, I don't know, some kind of mithril silver or whatever bright metallic there is. I really don't use those, so I couldn't give you any exact color names to try out. Okay, so we've got something that's a little bit lighter here. Put him in position. See how I'm working up this way, all the while catching some of that texture. And when I bring him in, this is what I was doing, was setting the stage for what we've got here. You can see how much darker, how much more contrast there is here than what we've got right now, and that's all in the plan. So here we've got our more bluish gray. Gonna work on this handle. Here's some of the mechanisms on this. Draw it across here, pick up as much texture as I can. And now I'm going to work these parts of the weapon. I want to do some stuff on the top. Introduce even a little more of the verdigris. Going to brace my hand. Like so. And then the reason why, you can kind of see why I'm using a big brush like this, because of that flat chisel point. Lets me do things like that. Here along the boot. So this really is a base coat. You're just kind of figuring out, okay, where are the colors going to go, what's going to go where. But you're also indicating where some of your shading is going to go. So I'm going to draw the brush across here. It's not a dry brush. That's got pretty much a full load of paint on it. So I bring the brush down, because remember we started out with this. Now that I've got almost the lightest light, I'm working the opposite way now. And this, again, will still work with metallics. This would just be whatever your lightest metallic color is going to be. So let's make sure this muzzle there we go. Needed to complete that. So I'm going to hold this upside down, and we're going to drag the brush this way. And because I put that kind of that dirty brownish gray in here, already this looks kind of weathered. We haven't done any rust, we haven't even done any of our shading yet, but already that looks less pristine and a little more orky. And there's still a ways we can still take it even further. So right here, along the top of the muzzle, along the top edge of the, right here, on the helmet, that is right here. Do that on the front edge. On the eye implant, just to bring that out. So that comes out a little more. Not going to get too excited about these spikes coming out of the shoulder yet, because we still have to put our red there. And we have one more hit on these back armor plates. These guys on the back of the boots. So let's say that I'm not going to do much more with these, with the grays. Now remember, I wanted this to be warmer, so I'm going to go back to that more pink flesh tone color. Hit the mechanism, hit this part of the business part of the blade along that top edge, because I want it to catch some light. While I have that color, I want to make sure that these teeth have something on them right there. I can see I've got some parts in here that need a little bit of gray. Just an indication. That's mostly just going to be shaded dark right there. So one of the kind of the two last major colors to throw out here will be some of the reds and some of the brown. So let's throw some reds out on the palette here, and we'll get to that next. So for our next part of the miniature we wanted to do were the reds. I'm going to switch for a second to one of these number 8 rounds. Got some of the olive drab here. And some of the red. So it makes kind of a nice deep red. Now I want actually a little bit more of a point, because what we're going to do is work our way around these little spikes on the shoulder pad, and at the same time these little epaulets here. So it's just to make sure. See, at this point, even now, I don't have to worry. If I do get something over the gray that's there, I can always maybe make that rust. That's one of the nice things about Oryx, is you can always add rust or chipped paint somewhere where you need it to. I'm not going to do a whole lot of that on this miniature. Again, there's other videos that talk about weathering and battle damage and rust. This is more about this shaded base coat technique. So all I'm trying to do is just fill in where some of the red is going to be. I keep kind of referring back to the other figure that I did. Not necessarily worrying about covering every single little bit, because let's say if I leave some off right there and just don't paint all that red, well, that's kind of a paint chip by default. So that's kind of a fun thing to do. But all I want to do, again, is establish where some of this red's going to be. I don't have to worry about the ends of the boots where the brown is, because we're still going to work on the brown yet. Now there's a little bit of red here in between these plates. So that's why we have this brush, and we bring out the armor plates. There's a little bit of a hole there because there's kind of a boss pole back banner thing that goes on him. But there's an awful lot of stuff on that boss pole, and I thought, we're trying to teach you something that's kind of an alien concept perhaps, and I thought, let's simplify things a little bit and not paint that also. So I can just want to get the rest of the red here. And we're almost. We've got a good start with the red. I'm going to throw a little bit inside the mouth here. This is why I didn't get too worried about the teeth yet, because I still had to paint that. And we will be tinting this red a whole different shade by the time it's all said and done. We just want to get that set. So we've got our reds on the shin guards here, on his back, along these shoulder pads here. Now that we've done that, it's time to start making this a little lighter. Here's that flat red, the original red. What I'm going to do is start to pick some areas. So I could still use the filbert brush if I wanted to, But I've already got all this color mixed into this brush. So that's going to let me, just like we did before, do blending on the surface. Hopefully you can see what's going on here. Again, if this red was to get out onto the gray, not such a big deal, because at this point you either just put that slightly lightened gray over the top of it, or you just make it rust or battle damage. So here I want this to be even a little lighter. Some of my red, I'm going to make sure I'm braced up against this. The ends of these right here. Now, if we want to lighten this, so I'm not going to reach for anything that's got white in it, because that's just going to make it very chalky. See that I reached for it's kind of a sort of vomit brown, orangey yellow color. And I will, in these places where I know I want the red to be lighter, I'm going to go right there. Maybe even on the tongue. And don't worry about the teeth at this point, because that color you saw us dip into, that's what's going to go where the teeth are. A little bit of reflected light there. I'm going to put a few little touches on the red, the tunic, on the back of this armor plate. Maybe another step with that orange red. So you can see this is a lighter red. It's not too orange though, but it's certainly not pink and chalky. And I'm getting to a point where I'm not going to want to get too much lighter, because in the detail phase of a miniature, that's where you can put some of your brightest bright highlights. And see here, I didn't just paint this as a flat thing. This is kind of supposed to indicate where maybe the paint of the armor has either been chipped away or it's maybe corroded a little bit. So at this point, I'm going to kind of leave the red alone. See how all of a sudden adding that color, all of a sudden it adds, this was all looking kind of monochromatic, and then boom, and out comes the red, and that sort of changed everything. Oh, that I mentioned that sort of a vomit brown type color. That's where I'm going to throw on the teeth. So all of a sudden, this is where that patience is. The patience, don't panic. You have to know what's coming next. You have to say, okay, I have to be patient. I have to wait for that next color. And with this, I'm going to tone it down a little bit with my leather brown color. And I'm going to make these straps lighter so that the rest of the leather can stay dark. And so I'm just, there's not a whole lot of shading on those. Just a little bit. It's more about indicating where they are at this point. I'm going to put a little bit of that right there on his earrings. Touch on the eyepiece. These little wristband things here, also going to be that color. We've got along his other wrist. You can see how I'm not really, even at this point, not being real careful about staying in the lines where the shell casings are. Now if I wanted to, I could also mix some flow improver in with this to make sure that it kind of flows across the surface. And you can see what I've done there. I've left this be and added a few lights there. I can even go in with my finger and take away if I need to. So let's do these little straps here, just like we did on the gun here. I'm just kind of pulling this down on the wristband. Look where I'm holding the brush. Practically not even on the handle itself. All in an effort to make sure that I don't get too locked into details. And if you want, take your finger, remove excess. We've got these shell casings in the magazine. And I'm just going to throw a little bit of yellow there, wipe some of it away. I might throw some over here. Some here. And what I'm going to do is put a little bit of the that pale flesh back out on the palette. Right here. I'm going to go into the teeth here, bring those out a little more. And now, remember we were worried about this getting too pink. Well, now we sort of want it to be a little pink. So that's where the verdigris is going to mix with some of the red we've got there. But see, I've changed the temperature of this. This is a much more pinkish red. And that is for the gums here. Or the tongue. The next stage lighter, this time using the verdigris. End of the tongue. And the idea is if this is going to be a warmer red, I can kind of separate out the reds of the inside of the mouth by making those a slightly different color temperature. Now at a certain point here, I'm going to put what we have here next to the finished one, and that's where you'll really, it'll give you a true indication of just how much dark we're going to add to this guy. I'm going to bring out this skull a little bit. I know he's going to be knocked down. So you have this checkerboard pattern here. And I do a few of the squares Again, I'm not going to worry about if they're perfect or not, because there's going to be a few layers of transparent glaze over the top of that. So I've got this item on his wrist. I'll put a few lights there. Now this, obviously, if you're using standard metallic paints, I guess at this point you're working with more of a brass or coppery, bronze color, whatever metallics they have for that. You don't have to turn this into a non-metallic metal exercise if you don't want to. So here, these little things that are going to hold plates to his belt. So what we've done, and not a lot of time. Now again, this is a larger miniature. You know, he's going on a 40mm round. He's pretty big. We've gotten a lot of that shading done, and not a lot of time. So we've kind of worked our way around. We've started to indicate where things are. I'm going to put a little bit of the verdigris back out and make sure that we've got a pretty good idea of where some of these highlights are going to be. So now that the red is there, so I've got my hand braced, and now I start to do a little indication of some shading on these little spikes. There we go. This trim on the armor, I don't really care. Just don't have to be super careful there, because there's gonna be an awful lot of shading being done there. Now here on this handle, on the parts of the mechanism, I apologize if sometimes I sort of get off camera, but it's all part of that working quickly, bouncing from one area to another. Sometimes I'm bouncing to one area faster than I can rotate this guy around. I can see I want the light of my gray along this part of the shoulder to follow the lightest part of the red. So very quickly, now all of a sudden, bang, that looks very dramatic. These are nowhere near our final lights and darks. So let's get out our finished guy here. All of a sudden there's just not as much. See how much more dramatic it is when you have all of these darks. This is what we're going to add later with the glazing. But right now, what are we focused on? Focused on adding lights. So back to the verdigris. Thinking about a few places here. Maybe this top edge of the helmet. And you can see at no point have I reached for a white yet. And what that's allowed me to do is to play with those color temperatures. Let's indicates a little bit more light on this. Just call that a kind of a metal plate there. Can add a little more light here. So that's the other nice thing, is you can adjust. Once you have a comparison, something to compare it to, it's easier to make those adjustments. Now it is possible also to actually take this stage too far, because if you do too much nifty stuff here, you know, when you do your next thing with the glazes and all that other tinting, well, you could end up wiping out a fair amount of whatever fancy stuff you're doing here. Because again, that's what the final detail stage is for. So I just want something here to indicate, there we go. I want a few slightly lighter things on this side also. Okay. While this again is a shaded base coat video, we are going to be doing some glazing here, because you have to see what have we been building up for? What's the big party that's supposed to happen next? So we will be doing some glazing after this. Now the leathers, there's not a whole lot really to be done. Just gonna mix that maybe with some of our other lights. We don't want this to be too light. We've got this light here. We want these to stand out. So we don't have to do a whole bunch with these few areas that have some leather, like the boots here. Just gonna throw a little bit of color on these. And that's it. So the way he stands now, this is typically kind of the end of the shaded base coat phase. But I want to show you at least some glazing and some detailing. The stage that follows all of your shaded base coat work is glazing. It's kind of a very broad term. This is glazing, shading, a little bit of wash, kind of all those things combined. Let's have a fair amount of different glazes and washes out here. We've got a Vallejo black shade, some from Secret Weapon, armor wash, everybody's favorite baby poop, flesh wash. We have a sepia shade from Vallejo. There's a blue-black wash from Secret Weapon. Got a couple of Games Workshop here. We've got a crimson and a green shade. Now this brown liner, this is from Reaper. This is more of a paint color, but it's very liquidy, but still very intense with the pigment. So this sometimes mixed with these other washes here can get you some really nice effects, some really nice deep washes. So I'm going to throw some of these out on the palette, and we'll do kind of a review of what you do once you've got your shaded base coat completed. So now we have everything ready for one of our more dramatic stages, the shaded base coat, and that's adding the glazing, shading, washing, tinting, all sort of falls into this general tent of the term that I call glazing. Glaze is really a very controlled wash. So I've got a brush here that has a pretty decent point, but yet still big enough to hold some of those washes. So let's see, I've got some greens here. We got the green shade. Look at how that's kind of a cooler blue color. Let's change that. Make a whole different green here. And this is some of the flesh wash. So that's a whole different set of greens. We're going to start a little bit lighter. What I'm going to do is put a little bit in there and actually take some of that away. I'm basically dabbing the brush onto a paper towel and taking some away. So I want some there. I want to leave. The whole idea is to leave some of your lights that you've already got. Leave some of those in there. So this is, see, I've got a much darker black mixed with green. Well, that's what we're going to use down here, if you can even see it. So what that's going to do is it's going to help to bring out the face. Got some of the sepia shade that I'm going to put over his earrings. So I'm going to leave this be. Let that go, not do anything else with it. We'll wait, let that dry. Let's go to the hands. And I can start slightly lighter. I want this to be that warmer green tone. Well, now in this here, this is where I'm going to take some of that cooler green mix with cooler because, well, there's more blue to it. What that's going to let me do is get a nice, interesting color transition along this hand, and don't feel worried or afraid to take some away with your finger. You can dab it away with a paper towel. What we've done is, see how this is yellowish here, the bluish green here. It would take much longer to just paint that in with lots of opaque layers of paint. So here the underside of the arm, again, take some of that away. We're gonna get some of the black here. And I'm kind of allowing this to kind of mix and mingle together, but all the while still keeping my lights intact. We have the other arm. Do the same thing here. So I want this to be somewhat lighter, but more on the warm side. So let's take away some of it with the brush. Dab it away on the paper towel. Take some away. Take some away where the lights are going to be. The inside of the hand that's holding the weapon. Let's even get a little bit of the brown wash in there. Again, you can take away, put my finger in there, and I just took away some of the green. We got the hand. So I'm going to start lighter, be controlled with it. And now with slightly darker, cooler green, allow that to mingle. And either way, I usually tend to take my finger to wipe that away. Sometimes the paper towel is a little too rough. So as we let the green kind of settle down, do its thing, let's maybe work with some of the other colors. I got an armor wash here. Gonna mix that with your the sepia, and see how all of a sudden this little part of the strap, which we couldn't really see it before, all of a sudden we see it now. Again, put some out. Don't feel shy about pulling some away with your finger. Now I'm gonna do this more rapidly than say on the glazing video, where that's really what it's all about, is what we're doing right now. This was more about how to set up this stage, but I definitely wanted you to see. Definitely wanted you to see this part. So the next thing I want to work on would be the grays. So let's get some more of the black shade out here. We're going to work a lot with the black shade and the blue black. So I've got the gun here. I've got some black. It's in a healthy amount of the blue. And I'm going to brace my hand. And I'm going to pull it this way. See that light? I'm going to save that. I'm going to work on the other side of that light. Even dab away some of the excess. And one of the reasons I'm holding it this way, it's kind of a watercolor trick. I want gravity to pull the majority of the liquid down this way. You couldn't do this. That's the difference between that wash and the glaze. If this was just a wash, we would have slathered it all over the entire gun by now. But instead, what this was about was keeping all of these. This is the stuff we put in during the shaded base coat phase, and we've saved some of that now. I'm going to take some of the armor wash. It'll be a little harder for you to see this side, but let's try it. We're going to do something similar, but I'm going to take away a little bit more of the lights because this is kind of in shadow here. It's going to get a little less light than the other side did. Still, it doesn't mean you can't pull some of this away, either by using your finger or by using the brush. So again, it was all about letting gravity do the trick. So instead of having to paint every single one of these little kind of rivets and bolts here, it's letting the paint do that for you instead of you having to stick all the paint in there. Now what I did was a little bit of that sepia shade in for your casings. And I'm going to take some of the black, mix it with some of the brown liner. We got the end of the muzzle here. That's going to be kind of scorched, singed, whatever. So it's okay to let a little more accumulate. But still, I want to make sure I don't lose all of the shapes. You can see how much we were able to do on this big gun with just a few strokes of, it was just the blue black with some of the black shade and not much else. So we'll let this sit. Not going to play with that too much anymore. Let that be. Let's hit his helmet here. So here's the spike. Pull off the extra. So all of a sudden now you've got all this shading where there was kind of none before. Some of the blue and the black together. Now for the rest of the helmet. And do the same thing. Gonna let what's here stay, what's on the outside rim stay. Maybe add a tiny bit more. But I took away where I wanted my light to be. So up here, I'm going to start out, see if you can see this. some more of the blue. I put a bunch here. Now I'm going to try something the opposite way. I got a whole mass of this up here. Let's go water this down a bit. I'm going to go opposite with the gravity. I'm going to pull this down. Pull it down through the mechanism here. And pull that away. And this will work with metallic paints. It might dull your metallics a little bit, but then again, this isn't orc. It shouldn't be bright and shiny. So watch as I go down the shaft of the weapon, pull away where I want my lights to be. And this is all very... The whole idea is about maintaining control of this. On the opposite side, I added a little bit of, so I got armor wash in here. Some more of the black. Make sure I get enough in the mechanism there, but then stop adding. And pull this down over the rest of the weapon. Wipe that away. Down to the handle. Take that away where it needs to be taken away. On the top half here, it's going to be more of the blue, black. These armor plates on the back. And I can cover over the red with that if I want. Again, leaving for now, not too much fooling around with the gun. Well, we've got this armor plate right here. This is, again, the blue-black. All of a sudden, the shapes come out. This looks like a rock chunk of concrete that he's standing on. While I have these colors, I just want to put some on there. Okay, now I want to fool around too much with these areas, let those sit a little bit. I'm going to go into the armor wash and some brownish paint here and work on the leather, but notice I just went right over those metal plates because I knew I could just take it away. You have to do that somewhat quickly though. If there's going to be a point where it's just dry and it's not going to come off. Maybe I'm going to grab some of that crimson for the other side. So look what I've done here. I'm going to create an edge where there was none because now we've got the darker area here. And again, we let this be. We work the dark on that side. We've got, but I want to make sure that the straps stand out. So I can either use my finger or here's the paper towel. Either way. The other leg. Using the same kind of thing that we did on the gun and on his axe. Just dragging all that down. Back to the blue-black. And some green. And now this is the part of the shoulder pad underneath those red epaulets there. And we can pull stuff away where we need to. And you can see I just let that shade over the red. Maybe I want the red here. Let's, again, some shading there. It brings out the armor plates. I can put some of the red into there. Some of the this is the flesh wash here, the teeth, and dab some of that away. Not too much. Where his eye is, you can make that darker. Again, it's all up to you, just where you feel you need your darkest darks to be. So I'm starting to throw some of the armor wash down in here, removing as I need to. Got some of the crimson in there. While I have the crimson, do a little bit there. Some of the warmer crimson and sepia shade. Not putting any over here. That's where we want it to be light. What I'm going to do is a little bit more, a little bit of off-camera glazing so that you can see how to do some of the finish details. I wanted to leave enough time for that. Plus, we want this guy to dry off a little bit. I'm going to leave this sit for a while. Let some of this stuff that I've been doing, let that dry off, let that calm down. And we'll get back to some more closing thoughts, finishing details on our shaded base coat orc. There's a few more things that I want to include here in this video. Now, it's not exactly shaded base coat related. It's more to show you how you can finish off your shaded base coat. So what I've added here is some Vallejo game color. This is Parasite Brown. This is the sepia shade back again. So what I've done was just put in some more and more dark glazes. So we had our shadow areas pretty well set, and with those shadow areas pretty well done, I think I can add maybe some rust. So what I'm going to do is take this nice watery mix and find some spots I'd like some rust. So what we're basically doing is doing a rust wash. You can do this with weathering powders too. I just thought I'd show you how this works in the context of the shaded base coat. So again, where we've left our darks, by using this wash here with the regular paint, you can see how it's seeping down into the crevices just like when we washed our shaded base coat. Same thing on this side. I can even take it away just like I did when we put those washes and glazes over. What helps set this up is to have those darks that I just told you about. So let's get some of these armor plates on the back. We've got these spikes, And this is why I didn't get too involved in the shading of those spikes, because I knew I wanted to throw rust over the top of those. Just like that. So that takes care of those 3 spikes pretty well. The helmet, maybe not going to do quite as much. Just a little hint here and there. Maybe a little bit across the front. You can see that I did put a little blue, a little bit of a sky blue in the that little eye oculus implant there. So let's do right here this mechanism part here. Been waiting a long time to be able to do this. Throw in some rust there. Let's get some on the blade, kind of in a splotchy, patchy form. You can also wipe some away. Here's another spot where I want some in this little sawtooth section. So again, another shot at this mechanism on this side. I don't want to wipe out all the darks though. So I just do it in places. Maybe there. That's it. I want to do the handle here. So this is what it's all about. We knew that we were going to do some of this rusting, weathering later. So that's why we didn't have to be really precise when we were doing our shaded base coat. I knew. See how you can come back and do all sorts of nice stuff with this. Just a tiny bit of basically a rust wash. So here on this leaf, I just leave that alone. Back to gun on the top edge, wipe some away. So it's just a bit of a tint of the rust, an indication that the rust is there. Here on the checkerboards, do a little bit there too. We've got these armor plates here on the inside. So that puts a little bit of life into this. Now, if you remember, we were using a lot of cooler colors, like the intermediate gray here. One of the reasons is because it was really make a nice contrast with all this rust coat. I make the rust really stand out, because look at what this does. Just a few minutes worth of rust. Just a few strokes of it here and there makes a pretty dramatic difference. You can put more highlights on the red. You can do more on the flesh tone. You could even put tattoos on the flesh. I think I might just pick out a few, maybe a few highlights on the flesh. I'm gonna maybe throw out a tiny bit of green. I might even mix some of the rust color in with that. So let's get it right here on the some on the hands. On the knuckles. Top part of the arm here. Again, that the notion of the shaded base coat was just to get as many different greens as we could out here on the face for the flesh tone, and then later on say, well, let's make this a little lighter, a little darker. You can change the color of the flesh tone a little bit if you want. So just all sorts of things, more options, essentially, is what we're trying to do. Is instead of having to worry about having to have a specific green color, you can, I bopped around from one green color to another. It didn't matter. If I didn't have this, I could always mix something else. Because that's happened to me a few times, especially on long-term projects. As the colors get discontinued, they run out, and you have to find something else. So very quickly, I'm going to grab my flat red. And do a few areas of either more intense red, lighter red. Every so often, see this little touch there. Let the rest of this be kind of dirtied and corroded, just a little bit there. And I use the sepia tone to make it a little more. See how it flows nicely. And this back shoulder pad here, and the reason this red starts to show up this way is because of all the darks that we set up. And do the same thing on these armor plates on the foot. Just picking out a few spots of the red. It'll be a little more intense. And then leave the rest. Just going very spotty here with the reds. So hopefully this you'll be able to incorporate some of this or all of it. It depends on what your needs are. Maybe you only do this for a certain part of a miniature. You might only do this on maybe just your flesh tones, or maybe just your armor. I don't use, again, it depends on the miniature. If I've got something where I need, maybe say a banner, where there's a lot of freehand, well, I'm probably not going to do too much shaded base coat on that, because it may need just a lot of delicate layers. But maybe on all the rest of the miniature, the shaded base coat will work fine. Here we go. And this pretty much set for now. Again, you can take it as far after as you want. I'm going to put him on the base, and then we'll see what he looks like. I've got the completed miniature here, and he's mounted on his base. The base is made from Sculpey. I actually have a video that talks about how to make that. And you can see, using these brushes, the filberts, craft brushes, and the liner brushes, you can do a lot of different color transitions without an extreme amount of effort. I've got the original figure here, and you can see it was pretty easy to match most of the colors, even though they were painted a long time apart. I didn't have any formulas written down. There was no specific directions. It was just paint and then shade and tint to try and get these two guys to match. And that's where I developed the shaded base coat technique. I was trying to match different figures for my army without having all the color formulas written down. Sometimes the colors didn't exist anymore. And when you don't have that paint color anymore, or the mixture that you had before, what do? You simplify. And you saw, just use some basic greens and reds. Essentially one rust color. And we were able to match both of these guys. Now this guy, I've added the boss pole that actually comes with the figure. And I did shaded base coat here as well. Same thing applied, mostly light colors here, mostly just variations of gray. Did some glazing, and then went back in to the mid-tones to finish off this boss pole. That's another example. These two things, the pole and the figure, were probably painted almost 4 months apart. And I did that intentionally just to see, well, could I make this belong with this even though they were painted at two completely different times. The base also had the shaded base coat technique. Especially in this area, you can see there's lots of glazes applied here. And if you remember the filbert brushes, the reason we use these, the large flat surface, the rounded tapered edge for blending, and then the chisel point, which allowed us, especially in the case of the metals here, to just drag the brush along the surface. Up here too, did the same thing along the face. You can proceed to your craft brushes. And remember that these liner brushes, especially we're going to do the shaded base coat, these you save for the very end. This is not something that you start out with. So I hope that this shaded base coat technique will help you in painting your army in the future, or just getting to your competition figures completed more rapidly.
They try to hide your face, and I am aware of fancy dress or in your knocking vest, then here's the place where you can join the rest. Day